They told her to wait outside, gave her a visitor sticker instead of the mother's bracelet. Nurses smiled politely, forms were signed in haze, and someone else held her baby first. Not once, not by accident, but again and again while she sat just one door away. She didn't scream, she didn't argue. She just watched it happen until the day they left something behind. If you've ever been quietly erased from a moment that should have been yours, or felt the sting of being replaced before you had the chance to begin, this story will stay with you. Because what they didn't realize was that the mother never left. It just didn't look close enough to see her. The hallway outside the maternity wing was colder than she expected. Not just in temperature, but in tone. Everything gleamed. Floors scrubbed to a dull shine. Walls painted in soft, supposedly soothing colors. Artwork meant to distract watercolor. Trees, vague clouds, neutral animals in pastel onesies. The kind of place designed to say welcome, even when it didn't mean it. She stood at the check-in desk, her hands still faintly trembling from exhaustion, her body sore. Not from injury, but from the kind of fatigue that comes after laboring in pain for hours, only to have things end too quickly, too quietly. She still hadn't been told exactly what had happened, only that they needed to monitor the baby, that someone would explain shortly that she should rest. But she didn't want to rest. The nurse behind the counter glanced up again, polite but mechanical. "K name?" She gave it, spelling her last name out slowly. "Okay." She watched the nurse type it into the system, her fingers fast, her face unreadable. A pause. Then the nurse nodded once, reached below the counter, and held out something small. A plastic clip-on badge. Visitor. It said in bold letters, not mother, not parent, not even her name, just visitor. She looked down at it for a long second. "There must be a mistake," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I'm the mother. I was told my daughter was here." The nurse didn't flinch. "I understand. But your name isn't listed as the primary contact on her chart. We're going to have someone speak with you in just a moment. You could just take a seat." She didn't move. "I delivered her yesterday morning." The nurse nodded again, like that part wasn't in dispute. "No, this is difficult. Please just wait in the family area. A caseworker is on the way." The badge remained between them. She took it, because not taking it would have meant more. Attention. And attention, she had learned, did not always work in her favor. She clipped it to her sweater, its edge catching against the knit fabric, and turned toward the waiting area. The chairs were soft in a way that made your posture collapse. She sat near the window, not because the view was nice, it was just the roof of the parking garage, but because it gave her something to look at that didn't require interaction. She watched cars move in and out, nurses coming off shift, a man pacing with a coffee cup and no jacket, everyone in motion, everyone moving forward. But she remained still. She had held her daughter once, briefly, long enough to register weight, warmth, a smell that was already fading from memory. She had counted 5 fingers on one tiny hand before. Someone said she needed oxygen. Then the baby was gone, taken quickly but calmly, just for monitoring. She hadn't thought to argue. Her body had been too heavy. Her head to light now, almost 24 hours later. She hadn't been allowed to hold her again. She looked down at her wrist. No hospital bracelet. It had been cut off that morning, replaced with a discharge summary and a brochure about postnatal recovery tips. She'd asked then if someone could walk her to the nursery. They said someone would be in touch, that someone needed to authorize it, that things had to be done properly. But no one explained who had that authority. She shifted in her seat and looked toward the hallway again. A nurse walked past holding a clipboard. Another pushed a cart with formula bottles. Doors opened and closed. Everything worked as if the system made sense, except it didn't. Because she wasn't wearing the sheetie. Because she wasn't wearing the file. She wasn't the one they called when the baby cried. And when the nursery doors opened, Again, and a woman with a different badge walked past holding a newborn. The nurse nodded at her, smiled. That woman hadn't given birth yesterday. She had the bracelet. She had the access. She was the one they called. And the mother sitting by the window remained a visitor, waiting, watching. Holding nothing, they called her name like they were offering something. Softly, gently, as if volume might tip the balance of the moment. She stood too quickly, forgetting how sore her body still was. The nurse didn't offer an arm or a smile, just turned and walked ahead with the kind of pace meant to be followed but not questioned. They didn't go toward the nursery, not down the corridor with the pale pink signage and cartoon giraffes. Instead, they turned left into a quieter section of the hospital. Past a locked door marked authorized staff only, and into a side room with no windows. It wasn't a patient room. There was no bed, just 2 chairs, a small table, a box of tissues. The walls were painted a grayish blue, and a framed picture of an abstract landscape hung slightly crooked near the door. The nurse gestured for her to sit. "She'll be with you in a moment," the nurse said. "Who?" The nurse hesitated. "Your caseworker." She almost laughed, but the sound caught in her throat. She wasn't here for a social visit. She hadn't come as a patient advocate or an aunt. She was the mother. Her body still carried the evidence tender, healing, raw. But she nodded, sat down, and listened as the door clicked shut behind her. The room was quiet. Not peaceful, just still. The kind of quiet you find in rooms where uncomfortable things are said politely. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. Her eyes found the tissue box. She didn't reach for it. The door opened again. A woman entered, early 40s. Maybe. Pressed blazer. Clipboard, a tote bag filled with folders. She sat down opposite her and crossed one leg over the other. "Ms. Delaney," she said. She nodded. "I'm Kendra. Been assigned to review your file and speak with you about next steps." Next steps. She could feel her heartbeat shift. She wasn't sure what had been written in whatever file Kendra held. And she didn't remember speaking to anyone who would have written anything at all. Kendra looked at her with professional warmth. "It's practiced empathy. We understand that things have been confusing. You weren't expecting some of the procedures that took place yesterday." "No," she said. "I wasn't." Kendra nodded as if that confirmed something she had already decided. "There's been a temporary hold placed on maternal contact while we complete a review," Kendra continued. "This is standard when there are concerns raised by prior evaluations or discrepancies in contact authorization." "What kind of discrepancies?" she asked. Kendra flipped a page. There was a notation regarding custody concerns and past social services involvement. "I understand there was an open inquiry last year related to housing instability." She nodded slowly. "It was closed." "I've had stable housing since April." "Okay," Kendra said, without acknowledging the point. But given that information, the medical team proceeded with caution. An interim guardian was contacted to ensure the child had continuous care. "Interim guardian," she repeated. "She's listed on the emergency contact form." Her mind reeled. The form. She had filled it out in triage in the middle of contractions. She had listed a friend, someone who had offered to help in case she needed a ride home. Not as a guardian, not as a replacement. "I didn't agree to anything permanent." "It's not permanent," Kendra said. "But while we verify all records and confirm living arrangements, that individual has been permitted limited access." "She held my daughter before I did," she said quietly. Kendra didn't respond. The silence in the room became thick. And in that silence, something shifted. "I want to see her," she said. "We're working on that. But it has to go through the proper channels. She's my daughter. I understand." But she didn't. None of them did. Because when she left that room empty-handed, unheard, only thing they handed her was another form. Another waiting period. Another quiet room. And still no baby. The folder had been pale yellow with a rubber band around it. A cheap plastic tab labeled Patient Preferences stuck out from the side. She remembered sitting on the edge of her bed, Weeks before the due date, thumbing through the pages with a pen, trying to decide how specific to be. The midwife had told her to include as much as she wanted. Even if it seems small, she'd said, the more we know, the better we can respect your space. She took that seriously. She wrote carefully, slowly. Not just check marks in the little boxes, but notes in the margins. She had researched every option, stayed up late on her phone, reading about cord clamping, newborn bathing, breastfeeding timelines. She wasn't trying to be demanding, she just didn't want to disappear into someone else's routine. She wanted to be heard. She remembered the line she had added under immediate post-birth requests. Her handwriting had been careful, curved. Slightly to the right, I want to hold her first. 5 words. Simple, gentle. Not controlling. Not unreasonable. Just a mother asking to hold her baby before the rest of the world stepped in. That paper was in a file now. Somewhere in the hospital system, probably scanned and forgotten. But she had written it with such hope. She had pictured it in her mind. Over and over her daughter placed on her chest, warm and blinking. The sudden silence after the push filled with that first small cry. The nurses stepping back for just a moment to let the two of them meet as equals. As mother and child, but that's not what happened. There had been a flurry instead. A shift in the doctor's tone after the final push. Someone calling for NICU staff. She remembered the buzz of a Doppler. The quick exchange of terms she didn't understand. Then the baby gone from her body and into a corner of the room. She couldn't see Dot. She had reached out instinctively, both hands lifted. Waiting. She's just having a little trouble breathing, someone had said. We're just helping her transition. The words had been meant to soothe, but they didn't explain why no one brought her daughter back to her after that. Why they cleaned up the bed? Why they transferred her to recovery without offering another glimpse? Why they let the monitors beep and the forms stack without once asking if she wanted to see her child again before morning? She had asked later. In the dim curtained room with the pulse monitor clipped to her finger. Can I see her now? They said the nursery was running tests. That she should rest. That everything was going well. Everything except the part where her arms were still. Empty except the part where the birth plan had been filed away and overridden by a new plan she hadn't agreed to. When she mentioned the note she had written, I want to hold her first, a nurse smiled politely and said, that's always the goal. Like it was a nice idea, but nothing binding. She wasn't asking for magic. She wasn't asking for control. She was asking to be her daughter's first moment of comfort. Now she was sitting in a quiet hospital room with a caseworker and a form that didn't reflect anything she had written. And someone else had held her baby first. Someone else had whispered in her ear. Someone else had said hello. And she hadn't even been given the chance to say, welcome. Not yet. Not even once. She hadn't intended to look. She was standing near the check-in desk, again waiting, as she had been told to. As if her presence needed verifying each time she stepped forward when her eyes caught the corner of a clipboard. Resting beside the monitor, it was angled slightly toward her, filled with tidy rows of handwriting, each line time-stamped and initialed. A simple heading printed at the top. Nursery access log. She leaned closer. Not obviously, just enough to make out the most recent entry. A name, not hers. Another name beneath that one, still not hers. She looked closer. The times were from earlier. That morning, one at 9:05, another at 10:12, both marked cleared for contact. One had a note beside it, held infant. 15 minutes. Her chest tightened in that slow, invisible way that doesn't show on the face but curls the stomach. She kept her voice calm. Excuse me, she said softly to the nurse behind the desk. Has anyone visited room N3 today? Nurse didn't look up immediately. One moment, she waited. The nurse clicked through several screens. Her fingers paused. There was one approved visitor, she said after a beat. "Do you want me to see if they're still with the infant?" "No," she said. Then again, quieter, "No, thank you." She stepped away, back to the chair near the window. She didn't sit this time, just stood beside it. The badge clipped. To her shirt still read "Visitor" in bold black font. It felt heavier now. The word too large, too final. She wanted to tear it off. Instead, she reached up and adjusted it slightly, as if the angle of it might shift how it felt on her chest. She had arrived 2 hours ago. She had been told to wait for updates. She had been told they were reviewing access parameters. But in the time she sat silent and compliant, someone else had already walked through the doors, past the desk, into the nursery, into the space where her daughter lay, and had held her. 15 minutes, a stranger or someone close enough to be given temporary access, had swayed gently in the rocker, murmured soft noises. Maybe pressed a kiss to a newborn forehead, maybe even said a name, and the mother had stood in the hallway. Without permission to touch her own child. There was no escalation, no outburst, just stillness. Because what could she say? She had been labeled already, discreetly but thoroughly. Not with insults or warnings, just phrases in files. Concern noted. Contact pending. Background under review. Everything designed to appear calm and methodical. Everything engineered to keep her at a distance. She wondered what the baby was wearing now. If they had changed her into a hospital-issued sleeper or kept her swaddled in the blanket from the delivery room. She wondered if her cheeks still held the soft red tone they had at birth, or if the color had faded to something more familiar. She wondered if her baby had cried, and who had picked her up when she did. When the door near the end of the hallway opened again, a nurse emerged with a chart in hand. She didn't look toward the mother waiting by the window. She walked right past. Her and the log on the counter remained open, filled with names that were not hers. It was a wide window, one of those panels meant to reassure visitors that everything inside was safe and clean. The glass was thick, set into the wall with a white border and a sign below that read, "Please do not tap." It looked into the nursery soft lights bassinet. Rose the rhythmic hush of a machine misting moisture into the air. Monitors beeped softly. Nurses moved calmly, some adjusting swaddles, others charting quietly at a corner station. She stood before the glass without drawing attention. Just one more woman in a hallway. Watching it took her a few seconds to find her. Not because she didn't know her face, but because they'd changed her wrap. The pink can blue striped blanket from the delivery room had been replaced with a solid white one tucked tightly around her tiny frame. Her hat had been replaced too. A pale pink beanie with a delicate rosette on the front. Not standard issue, not from her bag. She had packed her own newborn hat, ivory with a knot at the top. She had held it the week before and imagined it on her daughter's head. That hat was still zipped in her hospital bag. Inside the nursery, her baby was in someone's arms. A woman, dark hair curled at the ends, coat draped over her shoulders. Like she hadn't expected to stay long-rocked, gently side to side, the baby cradled with a practiced ease. She was smiling, murmuring something. A private conversation with a child who had only just entered the world. The baby didn't cry. She lay there quietly, her small hand resting against the woman's collarbone, her head turned slightly toward. The sound of a voice she didn't recognize but didn't resist. The mother watching through the glass took a step back, not out of fear, out of instinct. As if the space between her and that moment might crack under the weight of what she saw. She placed her hand against the wall beside the glass, not touching it directly, just bracing, just anchoring herself. That woman, whoever she was, had access. She had clearance. She had walked into that room and been given her daughter without hesitation. No badge that said visitor. Tays. No questions. No forms. And she, the one who had carried that body for 13 weeks, who had labored and bled and breathed and waited, was still standing behind. Class. She wasn't angry, Not yet. Because there was no room for anger in that moment. Only disbelief. She had imagined holding her daughter against her chest. Feeling the weight of her, the warmth, the sudden quiet that falls when a newborn hears. Their mother's heart beat again for the first time outside the womb. Instead, someone else had taken that place. She wasn't jealous of the woman. She didn't know her. Didn't know if she had good intentions or was simply answering someone else's call. It wasn't about her. It was about being erased from a moment she had spent her whole life walking toward. She stayed there for a long time, until the woman inside passed the baby gently to a nurse, until the baby was returned to her bassinet, one leg kicking out slowly from beneath the squaw, until the nurse walked away, and she stood on the other side of the glass, watching, still, unseen, still untouched, still waiting. She hadn't noticed her before, not fully. Just a blur of motion, past the nursery glass. But now, in the hallway near the staff lounge, she saw her clearly. The woman was speaking to a nurse softly, casually, as if this place belonged to her. As if none of what was happening required explanation. Her coat hung loosely from one arm, a leather handbag resting near her elbow, the kind with embossed initials and nowhere. She was holding a travel coffee cup, and her nails were done in a pale, almost pearlescent pink, clean, polished, at ease. Her shoes, too, said everything. The kind made for walking short distances between clean floors and scheduled meetings. Not for buses, not for parking garages, not for hospital corridors that led nowhere. The mother watched from down the hall, unseen again. She didn't move, just observed. The stranger smiled politely at the nurse, nodded at something, and then laughed at a remark the mother couldn't hear. Her badge swung gently against her coat. It didn't say visitor, didn't say temporary access. It said family liaison, and below that, authorized guardian access, infant N3N. 3, her daughter. The number assigned to her baby at birth. Neutral, clinical, convenient. She watched the woman tuck the coffee cup beneath her arm, retrieve her phone, and scroll with one hand as she turned back toward the double doors. It's the same doors that hadn't opened for her once. The stranger didn't look cruel. She didn't look like someone who meant harm. That was what made it worse. She looked comfortable. Comfortable. Walking through places the mother had only seen from the threshold. Comfortable taking calls on speaker near the nurse's station. Comfortable holding a newborn who wasn't hers. The mother tried to guess her name. Had they met before? Had she been at the hospital the day before? The day she gave birth? Was she? The one listed as temporary guardian on the file, the caseworker refused to let her read in full. Or had someone made that decision without needing to consult her? Had the form she signed under medication been enough? Had they taken a single signature and turned it into permission? The woman disappeared through the double doors, the same ones the mother had stared at for hours. The hallway was quiet again, except for the murmur of nurses and the distant chime of someone's monitor down another corridor. She stood still for a long time. There had been no scene, no confrontation, no explanation, just one woman walking forward, with access and another still waiting, still watching, held back by silence and procedure. It was strange. How motherhood could feel so public and so invisible all at once. How someone could know your name, your chart, your history, but not your heartbeat. And how a stranger could be handed your child before you even knew she'd opened her eyes. The mother reached for the wall, pressing her fingers gently against it as if that might connect her too. Something solid. There was no alarm. No protest, just the echo of doors closing. And a baby inside a room where her own mother wasn't allowed to stand. Not yet. It happened without announcement. A nurse appeared at the end of the hallway. Her expression, calm but unreadable. She called the mother's name, not loudly, not warmly, just enough to be heard. The kind of tone used for scheduled appointments and quietly diffused situations. This way, a nurse said, holding the door open to a small administrative office. Not a patient room. Not the nursery. Another neutral space, a round table, 3 chairs, a desktop computer humming quietly in the corner. The smell of copier paper and old carpet. A place where things were explained. She stepped inside and sat down a few minutes. Later, Kendra entered again, the same caseworker from earlier. This time with another woman in tow. Older, sharper. Gray at the roots of her tightly pinned hair. She wore a hospital badge clipped to a navy blazer and carried a slim tablet. She didn't put down "This is Ms. Hallstrom," Kendra said. "She oversees placement coordination for pediatric services." No one offered a handshake. The mother nodded once. Hallstrom sat directly across from her, legs crossed, tablet resting on her knee. "We appreciate your patience," she began. "We understand this has been an emotional time. Not difficult, not wrong. Emotional, a word used to reframe distress as volatility." The mother said nothing. Kendra leaned forward slightly. "We wanted to clarify a few points about your daughter's current care. The decision to involve an alternate guardian was made in response to some standing documentation on file, and out of an abundance of caution while we confirm custody eligibility." "I haven't lost custody," she said. Hallstrom smiled gently, but without softness. "That's correct. This is not a termination process. This is a review. But you're giving someone else access to my child?" "She is under temporary hospital care," Hallstrom replied. "During that time, approved individuals can be granted supervised access if listed on emergency forms or if a pending evaluation allows it." She almost laughed. "So someone can walk in with a badge and hold her, but I, her mother, have to wait for an evaluation." "There are concerns about consistency of care," Kendra said carefully. "There were gaps in documentation, some flags from last year, housing, employment, all resolved. We know you've made efforts," Hallstrom said, tapping something on her screen, "but we are obligated to proceed cautiously." The mother's voice didn't rise, but her hands tightened slightly on the edge of the table. "Who is she?" she asked. Kendra looked confused for a second. The woman holding her a beat of silence. "She's a family liaison assigned through a support program," Hallstrom said finally. "She's not the guardian, but she's been designated as a contact." "I didn't designate anyone. She was recommended through a referral during your intake paperwork," Kendra added. "I never met her. She's been cleared for access. That's all we can confirm." The room fell quiet. No one said the word mistake. No one said sorry. The mother looked at both women. The caseworker who knew only what was typed. The administrator who spoke like a policy manual. Neither of them had been there when her daughter was born. Neither of them had seen the hours of pain, the blood, silence. When no one brought the baby back, they spoke in measured tones. Access, about clearance, about forms and status and custody review. But not once did they ask, "What does your daughter mean to you?" Not once did they say, "How are you holding up?" Just process. Just distance. Just a meeting. And when it ended, she walked out the same way she came in, empty, dash-handed. She remembered the pen. It had a cracked grip near the top and a small smudge of dried ink on the side. It didn't write smoothly. Skipping slightly across the page, she had to press harder. The clipboard had been handed to her sometime between the 2nd and 3rd hour of labor. Just after they moved her into the delivery suite, just before the anesthesiologist arrived. The nurse had said gently, just some final consents. She hadn't questioned it. Her body was racked with contraction after contraction. Her mind narrowed to breath, pain, and counting. Her fingers had gripped the edge of the bed, one hand clutching the railing while the other scrawled her signature. At the bottom of each page, she hadn't read every word. Who does in that moment? She was dilated past 6 centimeters. She had signed what she needed to sign to make the pain go away, to get the process started, to meet her child. Some of the forms she remembered. One for epidural approval, one for admitting procedures. But others, she didn't remember being explained at all. Now, sitting in a different chair in a different room, she was being shown one of those pages again. It looked familiar. Her signature was at the bottom, tilted slightly from the angle she had signed it in bed. Rushed, slanted. This one, Kendra said, pointing to the middle paragraph, is what authorized contact in the event of your being deemed temporarily incapacitated? Wasn't incapacitated, she said. Kendra didn't answer that directly. The form gives provisional access to any named emergency contact for up to 48 hours. It's designed for situations where a birth parent cannot give immediate direction. She stared at the sentence. It didn't say guardian. It didn't say custody. But someone had interpreted it that way. Who told you I was incapacitated? Kendra hesitated. It's a clinical note, based on chart language from your intake. I was in labor. Yes, but the staff noted elevated distress and lack of responsiveness at several points because I was in labor. Kendra gave the smallest nod. I understand. But unfortunately, once access is granted under this form, we can't retroactively revoke it without administrative review. She felt the burn rising in her chest. Not fury, not yet. Just disbelief. A tightening that crept up from the gut like a storm pressing against the base of her throat. I didn't know what I was signing. The consent is legally valid, Kendra said. We recognize the timing was not ideal, but the signature is yours. She looked down at it again. That small, tired name, pressed into a piece of paper that had now been used to place a stranger between her and her daughter. They didn't say she had done anything wrong. They just said she had signed, and now someone else had been granted a hallway badge. Access to the nursery, the ability to rock her baby to sleep while she waited outside with a sticker that said visitor. She folded her hands tightly together. The skin along her knuckles pale from pressure. The system didn't shout. It didn't slam doors. It just moved forward quietly on the strength of a single unchecked box. It's a single misplaced signature. She had trusted the process because she thought it was still hers. Now she saw how quickly a form could become a barrier, a pen stroke. Made during the hardest hours of her life, now stood between her and the child she had carried, and the ink had already dried. She sat on the low bench outside the main elevators, where the floor curved toward the west wing. A corner not designed for waiting, but quiet enough to disappear into. She held her phone loosely in both hands. Not scrolling, not texting. Just staring at the screen, thumb hovering near the call log. There was a number on a small slip of paper in her pocket, written in pen, handed to her by Kendra at the end of their last conversation. No direct line. No office extension. Just a cell number labeled Program Liaison, Alternate Contact Supervisor. Leave a message if no one answers. Kendra had said, they'll follow up. She tapped the number and raised the phone to her ear. The line rang 4 times before. The voicemail picked up. Woman's voice, professional. Quick, you've reached the line of Marcy Latham. I'm currently unavailable. Please leave a message with your name, contact information, and the nature of your request. Beep. She didn't speak right away. Her own silence startled her. Then, quietly, she began, This is Alina Delaney. I'm the mother of the newborn, currently assigned as infant N3. I was told you're involved in coordinating alternate access. She paused. Her throat tightened. I'd like to understand why I haven't been allowed to hold her yet. I'd like to know why someone else was cleared before I was. And I need to speak with someone who can explain how that decision was made. A shaky breath. She's my daughter. I haven't even touched her skin since the delivery room. Another pause. I'm available anytime. Please call back. She ended the call. It didn't feel like anything had changed. The message felt small, flattened, like a square of paper dropped into a canyon. She checked her phone again. Battery at 74%, signal full. No missed calls. No texts, just a silent home screen, and her reflection faint in the black glass. A nurse passed by, didn't look her way. She sat there for another 10 minutes. 15. Her phone never lit up. The hallway remained quiet. A distant lullaby tune played faintly from the nursery speaker system. Someone else's baby being discharged. Someone else's ending going to plan. She reached for her cup of water and took a small sip. Her lips were dry. Her hand trembled slightly as she set it down. Across the corridor, a couple walked past carrying a car seat, the baby inside wrapped in a yellow blanket. They moved easily, smiling. The father cradled a gift bag. The mother clutched a discharge folder. Neither of them noticed the woman sitting quietly in the corner. Phone still balanced in her palm. Alina checked again. Nothing. She pressed play. Listened to the voicemail she had just left. Her own voice sounded distant, controlled, but not desperate. Not. Yet, she didn't call again. Not that day. Instead, she placed the phone in her lap, leaned forward, and let her fingers press hard into her knees. A visitor's badge still clipped to her sweater, her name left on a line that may or may not be returned, and her daughter. Just a hallway a waist, untouched. Still waiting, or maybe not waiting at all. Maybe just gone on without her. It wasn't offered right away. She was back in the family lounge against same stiff chair. Same artificial plant drooping in the corner when a nurse entered carrying a folder. Not her nurse, not one she recognized. A younger one, eyes kind but hurried. Alina Delaney. She asked gently. She stood, hopeful, certain this would be it. Permission, a hallway pass. A room number. A way in. The nurse gave a small smile and opened the folder. We thought this might be nice. Kay, she said, lifting out a printed photo. Glossy, standard size. Edges still warm from the machine. The image was soft and bright. Her daughter swaddled tightly in a white blanket, the pink beanie still on her head. Her face turned slightly toward the camera, eyes closed. Lips parted just enough to show the softness of her breath. Someone had tucked a plush bear beside her shoulder. Hospital issued, clearly untouched. Behind the image, in the blurred background, was a woman's hand, delicate, manicured, holding the edge of the bassinet. It wasn't her hand. Alina held the photo carefully. One finger resting on the corner. She's beautiful, the nurse said. She didn't respond. Not because she didn't agree, but because her throat had closed up. Just slightly, just enough. She's resting comfortably now. Vitals look good. She took to the bottle well. The bottle, Alina asked quietly. The nurse hesitated. There was no instruction for direct breastfeeding. We didn't have any maternal milk supplied, so formula was used. I didn't know, she said. It's okay, the nurse replied, misunderstanding. Many parents choose that now. But she hadn't chosen. She had packed a nursing bra. In her hospital bag, had read about colostrum. Had filled out a form weeks ago indicating her preference for breastfeeding within the first hour. She had written no formula unless medically necessary on the final page. But now, the decision had been made without her. She looked back at the photo. There was something surreal about it. Familiar, yet distant. Like a memory someone else had borrowed. Her baby's faceround.com, cheeks still puffy with newness, but out of reach, flattened into paper. Smiling at a lens, not at her. She wanted to ask who had taken the picture. Who had approved it? If the woman's hand in the frame was the same one who'd held her child earlier. But she didn't. The nurse tucked the folder under her arm. We can print more if you'd like. It's usually a little photo session on day 2 or 3, depending on discharge timelines. Thank you, she said, her voice smaller than she meant it to be. The nurse nodded once and turned to leave. Alina stood still in the center of the room, photo in hand. No one had said she couldn't see her daughter, but no one had said she could. Instead, they gave her a picture. A moment already passed, already filtered, already framed. She studied her daughter's face for a long time, noticing the curl of one fist near her chin, the soft red line along her eyelid where the skin folded in sleep, her nose, unmistakably hers, and behind her, that unfamiliar hand. She slipped the photo into her purse between her ID and her insurance card. It bent slightly at the corner, not ruined. Just CREASED and the only image of her daughter she had touched since the morning she was born. It had been resting at the foot of her hospital bed that morning. Before the nurse brought her water, before anyone came to check her vitals. A white paper gift bag with soft handles. No branding, no tag. Just set quietly on the plastic chair near the window, as if it had been placed there in passing. As if it didn't matter. She didn't notice it at first. Her attention had been on the clock, the hallway sounds, the shift in light as day pushed slowly into the room. But after the nurse left and the silence returned, she turned toward it. Inside the bag were small things. A folded pink onesie. Not the one she had brought. This one was from the hospital gift shop. Shag still attached. A printed quote across the chest read, "Love you more than the stars." There was a soft rattle, shaped like a lamb, the kind with stitched eyes and stuff. A satin loop on the top 4 hanging dot and a folded card, no envelope. Just the card opened and signed IT read, "For baby N3, with love always." Marcy, that name? She stared at it for a long time, letting the shape of the handwriting sink in. Curved letters, careful spacing. It looked personal, not professional. Not just a gesture. Not just an obligation. She checked the bag again. No receipt, no hospital markings. These were not from staff. These had been brought in, hand-delivered. And left in her space, a gift from a woman she hadn't met, to a baby she hadn't held. It felt surreal, like discovering someone had been living in your home without your knowing, like finding clothes in a closet that didn't belong to you. This was her daughter's first gift, and it hadn't come from her. She pulled out the onesie. It was soft, cotton blend, expensive. A size too large for a newborn, meant for a few months down the line. Planned ahead, considered. She hadn't even had the chance to put on the outfit she'd packed. It's the one with tiny elephants. The one her sister had mailed to her from Oregon when she found out the due date. That one was still folded neatly in her bag. It's untouched. She picked up the card again. No contact number, no return address. Just the name Marcy, a woman whose voice she had never heard, who had held her baby, who had left a gift, who had signed a note like a relative. There was something unbearable in the calm of it. The quiet authority of someone who could appear and vanish without explanation. She wondered if Marcy had smiled when she picked out the rattle. She had held it up and imagined it in a tiny hand. If she thought she was helping. Who? Mother who hadn't asked for help? Or the system that preferred someone like her? She folded the card once slowly and slid it back into the bag. Then she placed the onesie on the chair next to her own packed clothes. Still unused, she didn't tear the card, she didn't throw the rattle, she just sat beside the bag, quiet. And still, trying to imagine a world where that gift hadn't been left at all, and realizing again that she didn't have. A say, not yet. It was small. Tucked discreetly in the top corner of the nursery, behind the false ceiling tile, angled downward just enough to catch the bassinets lined in neat rows. Not visible unless you looked up. Not hidden, but never mentioned. She only noticed it because she was standing by the security desk, waiting. A nurse had asked her to wait there just for a few minutes while they checked with the attending. Just to make sure the visit window was still approved, she'd said. Alina had nodded. She was good at waiting now. The security officer didn't speak to her, just sat behind the desk, typing. A monitor to his left showed 4 small squares. A grainy live feed of a different hallway. The third square in black and white showed the nursery. She recognized the soft curve of the window and the warm overhead lighting, even rendered in GRAYSCALE in the far corner of the frame. She saw her daughter's BASSINET.N3 labeled at the base with the neutral tag she'd come to resent. A nurse. Moved past it slowly, adjusting something near the foot. Then another woman stepped into view. Alina leaned slightly toward the monitor. She knew that posture, the long hair pulled back. The same pale pink manicure she had seen days earlier in the hallway. It was Marcy. The woman smiled softly, leaned over the bassinet, and gently picked up the child. Her child, the image, was silent. There was no way to hear what was being said. But Alina didn't need sound. The tenderness was visible in the curve of Marcy's shoulders, in the way she adjusted the blanket, in the way her head tilted toward the baby as if speaking. Marcy bounced lightly on her heels, soothing, familiar, practiced. She was wearing the same blazer from before, clean, structured, like she had come not to visit but to manage. Alina stood motionless in front of the monitor. She didn't speak. She didn't ask to be let in. Ski just watched. The security officer finally glanced over, noticed her staring, and turned the monitor slightly away. "Sorry," he muttered. "Those aren't for public viewing." She stepped back, but the image remained fixed in her mind. Someone else holding her baby like it was a regular day. Like no mother waited outside the room. She thought about what the baby was seeing. A warm chest, a steady voice, arms that did not tremble, eyes that did not plead for access. Alina hadn't been allowed in the room for days, and now the only glimpse she had was pixelated and indirect, through a lens not meant for her. She turned away from the desk. A nurse returned shortly after. "There was a shift change," she said gently. "We'll need to wait for the next attending to confirm." She didn't argue. She sat again in the plastic chair by the hallway, not crying, not asking, just remembering the image on the screen. Her baby calm, breathing, rearresting in the arms of a woman whose face she hadn't been given permission to confront. Not in the nursery, not in conversation, only in flickers. Through a feed she wasn't supposed to see. It came without ceremony. No grand explanation, no apology. It's just a small shift. So quiet she almost missed it. She had returned from the cafeteria with a cup of lukewarm tea and a biscuit she hadn't touched. Her badge still clipped to the same sweater she'd worn for 3 days. A nurse at the main desk glanced up, then looked back down at the chart she was flipping through. Alina Delaney. She stood quickly, the tea sloshing against the lid. "You're cleared now," the nurse said, motioning with her hand. "Room 3B. You can go in." That was it. Room 3B.A direction. Not an invitation. She followed the hallway without speaking, each step landing softly on the waxed floor. Past the framed print of watercolor flowers. Past the hand sanitizer dispenser she had used so many times, out of habit. Past the quiet conversations of other families, other lives. The door to room 3B was slightly ajar. She paused for a moment outside it, hand resting just above the metal handle. Her breath caught not from fear, but from something quieter, something deeper. The possibility that after all of it, the room might be empty, or worse, filled with things she didn't recognize. She pushed the door gently inside. The light was low. A rocking chair in the corner, a bassinet near the window, a monitor blinking softly above a wall unit. It smelled like warm wipes and formula and something else, something human and fragile. Her daughter lay swaddled in the bassinet alone, no nurse beside her, no clipboard being filled, no visitor with polished nails and calm posture, just her, still and small. Hands curled near her face, chest rising and falling with soft rhythm. Alina stepped forward carefully, afraid the sound of her breath might disrupt the silence. She knelt beside the bassinet and stared. Every inch of her child looked both familiar and brand new. The wisps of dark hair, the curve of her nose, the faint crease above one eyebrow. She reached out slowly and rested her fingertips against her daughter's hand. Warm, real, not a photograph, not a screen, not a second-hand report. Her daughter stirred lightly at the touch, lips parting in the beginnings of a yawn. One eye fluttered open, then closed again. Alina didn't speak. She didn't need to. She leaned her forehead against the edge of the bassinet and let the quiet surround her. No one had announced this change. No one had said, "You may go in now because we were wrong." No one had admitted that they had kept a mother waiting too long for a moment that should have never been withheld. But here she was, room 3B, no longer a visitor, just present. She pulled the nearby chair closer and sat beside the bassinet, her hand still resting lightly on her daughter's arm. And for the first time in days, she didn't feel like she had to wait. There was a clipboard on the wall near the door, a daily care log. Names and initials scribbled in fast handwriting. Times marked in military format. Feeding schedules, vitals, observations. Alina, read it slowly, line by line. As her daughter slept. 10:15, fed formula ml 1330 diaper. Change.com RN, JV 1605. Soothing, skin to skin, L 1840 sleep. Vitals normal RN. Says she paused. Skin-2-skin. It wasn't her. She hadn't been there at 1605. She had been down the hall, watching the security monitor. In silence, Marcy Latham ML had held her baby against her own skin. The intimacy of that act left an imprint. Unseen but not unfelt, Lena sat back in the chair, the pages still clutched in her hand. No one had asked her permission. She looked around the room, a diaper cart, a cabinet with hospital-issued blankets, a tray with sterilized bottles. Everything clean, orderly, benign. And behind it all, the memory of those silent hours. The ones where decisions had been made with her name still on the door but not on the list of approved contact. She thought of the intake forms again, the ones she signed mid-contraction, the ones no one had explained. She thought of the phone. Calls she never received, the voicemail that went unanswered. The way the monitor had been turned away when she looked too long. No. One had said she wasn't allowed, but no one had told her she could be more than a name on a label. She pressed the call button. A nurse arrived, older, with silver hair tucked under her cap and kind eyes. Yes, Alina kept her voice level. I'd like to know who approved the alternate contact designation. The nurse hesitated. That would be in the initial intake notes, likely filed under emergency protocol. The supervisor signs off, based on what's presented. I'd like to see it. I'm not sure we can provide that directly, the nurse said. There's a release process, a formal request. Then I'd like to start that process. A pause. I can get you the form. Thank you. The nurse nodded and left the room. Alina sat still. It wasn't just about who held her daughter. It was about how icily she had been moved to the margins. It's how quietly it had happened. It's how no one ever used the word removed. But that's what it had felt like. Removed from decisions, removed from presence, removed from memory. She picked up her phone and opened the Notes app. She began listing everything she wanted to ask, clearly, calmly, with no heat. Just facts. Who designated alternate contact without confirmation? When was the form signed and by whom? Why was I not informed of visits to my child? What guidelines allow skin to skin by a non-parent without consent? The list grew. Each question sharpened a memory. Each line on the care log became a record of absence, not just hers, but the system's failure to acknowledge her role. Not neglect, just omission. The kind that looks harmless from the outside, the kind that rewrites reality. Line by line, she folded her daughter's blanket tighter around her and waited. Not to be allowed, but to be answered, and maybe, finally, to be seen. It arrived in a manila folder, handed off quietly by the same nurse who had spoken to her earlier. No explanation, no commentary. Just the form and a pen. Alina unfolded the top sheet. The print was dense, legal in tone, with boxes and signatures, initialed timestamps, and a barcode at the top right corner. Across the top, the heading read, Temporary Access Authorization, Neonatal contact protocol. Non-custodial party. Below that, her daughter's ID. Infant N3. And beneath that, the line that made her stomach drop. Approved alternate Latham. Marcisa approval box was signed, time-stamped for the evening of the delivery, only 6 hours after the birth. The nurse supervisor had initialed it. A small handwritten note beneath said, "Mother under sedation post-surgery. Alternate verified by pre-file program contact list." She turned to the second page. There it was, a form she didn't remember signing. Pre-op paperwork, likely slid in between wristbands and consent notices. Her signature at the bottom. A checked box beside the line. "In the event I am incapacitated or unreachable post-delivery, I authorize the hospital to consult the following parties for temporary care decisions." And below that, one name. Marcy Latham. Her own handwriting. Her own signature. The date matched the morning of her scheduled induction. She blinked. Trying to remember, that day had blurred into preparation. She had sat on the edge of the hospital bed, filling out forms in waves between contractions. The nurse had explained very little, just where to sign, which lines to initial. She had followed along, assuming it was all precaution. She hadn't known this was what it meant. She flipped back to the first page. There was a visitation log attached for visits by Marcy. All logged, all within visiting hours. Each one marked no incident. Infant responsive. Comfort held. All official. All routine. All without her. The folder trembled slightly in her hands, not from anger, not from fear, but from something heavier. Something rooted in the realization that she had signed away her own presence, unknowingly, briefly. But enough to Lena placed the form on the table. This wasn't about blame, it was about consent. In a moment when her body was cut open, her child removed, and her consciousness drifting in a haze of anesthesia, the world had continued turning without her. Decisions were made. Memories were formed. Hands had cradled her daughter. Voices had soothed her, and none of them were hers. She opened her phone again. Added to the list was, "I informed clearly what alternate contact meant. Why wasn't I notified before each visit? Was there an opportunity to revoke it when I regained awareness?" She folded the form slowly, returned it to the folder, and held it against her chest. No one had hidden anything, but no one had stopped to ask. Whether she'd been ready, whether she'd understood, whether she'd wanted someone else's arms to be the first her daughter remembered. The nurse returned quietly. "Would you like a copy?" she asked. Alina nodded yes, please. She would keep it, not to fight, but to remember how easily a mother could vanish on paper, even while she was still in the room. It had a ribbon tied to it, pink satin, soft, and curling slightly at the ends, looped through a plastic clip shaped like a butterfly. The pacifier itself was pale lavender, unused, resting inside a small zippered pouch labeled Marcy's bag. In the corner of the nursery, Alina found it by accident. She had been reaching for a blanket. One of the hospital's standard issue. Flannels folded beneath the bassinet. Her hand brushed the edge of the pouch and it tumbled onto the floor. She crouched slowly to pick it up, careful not to wake the baby. The name was printed clearly, not on a tag, not on a sticker, but sewn in, like it belonged. She opened the pouch, unsure why. Maybe just to see what someone else had packed inside. The pacifier, a small sealed packet of sensitive skin wipes, a lavender-scented burp cloth, and a handwritten card, soothing items for N3's use as needed. Marcy, her breath held. Something about the neatness of it all. The preparation, the assumption. These weren't emergency donations. They weren't hospital provided. These were belongings, personal, chosen by someone else for her child. She set the pouch down on the counter beside the sink, then sat slowly on the chair watching her daughter sleep. The baby stirred slightly, her face scrunching for a moment, her mouth opening in search of comfort. "What?" Elena reached instinctively, brushing the back of her hand against her daughter's cheek, letting her voice hum quietly into the room, low, steady, unsure. The baby settled. No pacifier. No cloth, no butterfly clip, just presence. Her presence, she hadn't packed much in her own bag. Just one soft muslin blanket. One pacifier, the green kind that came from the NICU cart. And a small teddy bear, worn from years in her sock drawer. Saved from her own childhood. None of those things had made it into the nursery. She remembered asking a nurse earlier. Were any of my items used? The nurse had paused. We didn't see a labeled set. These were already approved and on the list. Whose list? She didn't argue. But the pacifier stayed on the counter now. Not in the bassinet. Not in reach. It wasn't about plastic or shape. Or brand. It was about who had decided what her child would need before. She had the chance to try. It was about how care had arrived ready, waiting, and not hers. She picked up the pouch one last time and turned it over. A small hospital sticker. On the bottom, read cleared for bedside use, approved contact. That phrase again, approved contact. It lingered like static behind everything behind the wristband she was never given. Behind the folder she wasn't told to question. Behind the image of another woman holding her. Baby with practiced ease, she placed the pouch in the bottom drawer of the storage cart. Not to hide it, but to separate it. She pulled her own muslin blanket from her bag and gently laid it over her daughter instead. Not new, not fancy, but hers. No sticker needed. It happened near the elevators. Alina had stepped out to refill her water. The hallway was unusually quiet for midday, the kind of lull that settles between shift changes. She passed a volunteer cart, the rattle of small wheels echoing faintly on the floor, and approached the filtered water station by the far wall. That's when she saw her, Marcy, standing by the elevator bank, clipboard in hand, dressed in the same beige trench coat she'd seen earlier in the week, hair pinned neatly back, composed, like someone who belonged in buildings like this, who understood schedules and policies and morning briefings. She wasn't alone. A man stood beside her. Late 40s, maybe 50, in a blazer too sharp for casual visits. He held a small folder and gestured with it as he spoke to Marcy in low tones. They stood angled toward each other, but when the man turned briefly, Marcy's eyes flicked a waned, landed on Alina. It lasted less than a second. But in that second, the air shifted. Not surprise, not recognition, but something colder. Measured the look of someone recalculating, not reacting. Alina didn't move, neither did Marcy. No smile, no nod, no apology. Just a pause, a glance, and then a return to the conversation, as if Alina were part of the furniture, as if the mother of the child she had held, soothed and dressed, meant nothing more than a quiet line in the chart. Alina turned back to the water dispenser, pressed the button, and watched the bottle fill slowly. Her hand trembled slightly against the plastic, not from fear, but from the realization that she'd been seen and dismissed, not challenged, not questioned, just categorized. She took her time walking back to room 3B. The baby was asleep when she returned, arms outstretched in a crooked Y across the blanket she'd tucked earlier. A small crease along her cheek showed where she'd been resting. Alina sat beside the bassinet, her back to the door, the glance still playing on loop in her mind. What had Marcy seen when she looked at her? A complication, an afterthought, a mistake that had been quietly managed. She thought of the forms again, the rattle, the gift bag, the folder with initials. And now the look. Polite omission disguised as professionalism. She didn't speak of it. To the nurse who stopped in later, didn't write it down in her phone, didn't ask who the man was or why. Marcy had been there again. She just held her daughter's hand and watched the room grow dim as the light outside changed in silence. Because sometimes the sharpest words are the ones never said, and the deepest. Cuts come from those who look straight through you. Okay, keep talking. It was slid under the door just after 7 a.m., a standard hospital printout, gray margins. Black text, 3 columns. Neonatal Daily Summary, Patient N3. The same summary they filed each morning, placed at the bedside for authorized readers. Lena had seen them passed around by nurses, folded over clipboards, reviewed in soft voices near curtain partitions. But this one was for her Dot, or at least it should have been. She picked it up from the floor and sat on the chair by the window. The morning light came in sharp through the blinds, slicing the room into narrow ribbons of brightness and shadow. The page was warm in her hands, freshly printed. Vitals, stable. Feeding, 2 a.m. bottle, 5:30 a.m. attempted breast, declined. Sleep, uninterrupted 6 hours. Caregiver contact, present for morning soothing ml. She stared at the last line. Ml. Marcy Latham. Not mother present, not biological parent. Just 2 initials that had returned again quietly. Early, without warning. It wasn't just the visit. It was the implication that someone else had arrived before her. That the sheet had been typed and finalized while she slept in the reclining chair across the room. That a person could walk in, be recorded, and walk out again without needing to say a word to the one person who should have known. Her daughter stirred beside her, the slow rustle of cloth. A soft exhale through tiny nostrils, Alina folded the paper neatly in half. Then again, there had been no knock, no greeting. Just a document slid under a door like junk mail. She stepped into the hallway and found the nurse at the desk. "Can you tell me when the morning summary was logged?" she asked. The nurse scanned her screen. Report finalized at 6:43 a.m. "She was here, Marcy." A slight hesitation. "Yes. She checked in through early access. 10 minutes. Just comfort and check-in. She has clearance through the temporary authorization still on file." Alina said nothing for a moment. "Then I'd like that clearance revoked." The nurse glanced up. "I'm the mother. Present. Coherent. Not under sedation. The reason? That form was signed no longer applies." "I understand," the nurse said. "Let me page the floor supervisor." Alina nodded, then returned to the room. Her daughter was still awake, eyes open now. Unfocused but moving tracking light. Or perhaps just her mother's shape near the bed. She sat again beside the bassinet and rested her palm over the small belly, felt the breath, slow, rhythmic. She knew that some might say 10 minutes isn't much. She knew that on paper it would look harmless, a check-in, a brief touch, an update logged. But in reality, it was something else. It was a window of intimacy taken quietly, an impression formed before the mother was even awake. It was repetition, not oversight. She unfolded the paper again, stared at the line, present for morning soothing ml. And for the first time, she took out her pen. She crossed out the initials, then wrote beside it slowly, deliberately. "Mother was present. Mother is here." It sat beneath the bench just outside room 3B. Not tucked away, not hidden, just resting there like it belonged. A pale blue canvas diaper bag, worn at the edges, with a monogram stitched neatly on the front. Flap ML. Alina noticed it when she stepped out to ask for a fresh blanket. She paused when she saw the bag, unsure at first if it had been left by a nurse. But then she recognized the pattern, the same one that matched the pacifier pouch. The same neatness in its packing. It's the same initials. She didn't touch it. She walked past it once, then again no one came for it. 30 minutes passed. It wasn't hospital issued. It wasn't labeled for donation. There was no tag indicating it had been checked in or stored with personal belongings. It just sat there, left behind like a marker. It's quiet and visible. She walked back to the doorway of her daughter's room and looked inside. Still sleeping. Still hers. She returned to the bench and crouched beside the bag. Not to open it, not to search, but to understand there was a small side pocket half zipped. Inside it, she could just make out the edge of a folded photograph, tucked in like a keepsake. The corner showed a baby's hand curled around someone's finger. A familiar blanket in the background, the same one she had brought from home. Her hand hovered above the zipper, then withdrew. She stood up. She walked to the nurse's station and Said there's an unattended bag outside room 3B. I believe it belongs to Marcy Latham. The nurse followed her gaze. We'll collect it, she said simply. Shouldn't be there. Alina nodded. She didn't ask why it had been left. She didn't ask whether Marcy had forgotten it or placed it there deliberately. But as the nurse picked it up and carried it away, Alina watched it disappear down the hall like something being removed from a stage-an object not meant for the final act. Back in the room, she sat beside her daughter again. The light had shifted. Afternoon now, warmer, less sterile. She reached into her own hospital bag and pulled out a photo. One she'd carried for years. It was her at 7, holding her mother's hand in the hospital waiting room. The corners were creased, the colors faded. She'd packed it without thinking. A quiet talisman folded into her things. She placed it on the bedside tray. Face up, no initials, no claims, just memory. Real, UNSTAGED, and hers. It came with no announcement. Mid-morning. The hallway buzzed with the quiet rhythm of shift-change clipboards being traded. Coffee cups half full, nurses exchanging notes in low tones. Alina was adjusting the edge of the blanket draped over her daughter's bassinet when a quiet knock tapped the half-open door. A woman stepped in. Not a nurse, someone older, with a lanyard that read floor administrator and a folder tucked under. One arm, Alina Delaney. She asked gently. Alina nodded, straightening. The woman extended her hand, not with a form, not with another printed update, but with a simple white strip of hospital plastic, a wristband, not the visitor tag she'd worn for 6 days, not the paper sticker that peeled off after hours. A full patient-verified identification bracelet. It had her daughter's name, and beneath it, her own. It was delayed in the file updates, the woman explained quietly. It should have been assigned sooner. The system was still operating on the emergency designation from the intake paperwork. We've corrected that. Alina didn't respond right away. She just looked at the bracelet. Simple, small, the kind handed out without ceremony in most maternity wings. It's kind every mother usually receives by default. But for her, it felt like a reclamation. She took it in both hands, ran her thumb over the barcode, then slid it onto her wrist. It clicked shut with a soft snap. A plastic band, but it fit like something earned. The administrator paused. All alternate contacts have been removed from the file, she said. There will be no further visitation without your written approval. Alina nodded once. Thank you. The woman left. Silence returned. She sat down slowly, her eyes on the bracelet now circling her wrist. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't new, but it held her name and her daughter's name side by side. No abbreviations, no proxies. Just fact, just presence. She held her daughter's hand so small it barely curled around her finger. The baby stirred, eyelids fluttering open for a moment. Their eyes met briefly, weightlessly, but something passed between them. Something quiet and whole. For the first time, there was no form to sign, no door to wait behind. No name above hers. She was listed, she was logged, she was mother. And this time, the system recognized it. It was the final day. Discharge papers had been printed. A nurse had already wheeled in the small bassinet carrier with its striped receiving blanket neatly folded inside. Elena's duffel bag sat zipped at the corner of the room, and the hospital-issued diaper supply was stacked beside. There was no rush, but it was clear their time here was closing. Alina sat by the window, her daughter resting quietly against her chest. Their breathing matched. The bracelet still clung to her wrist, slightly loose now after a week of little food, less sleep. But she wore it proudly. Then came the knock. Not a nurse's rhythm, not an administrator's, just 3 soft taps. And then the door pushed open. Marcy stood there, no clipboard, no blazer, no badge, just a plain gray sweater, slacks, and a tote bag hanging off one shoulder. Her face was unreadable. Eyes not defiant, not ashamed. Just tired. Alina didn't move. Marcy didn't step inside. "I came to say goodbye," she said quietly. "I won't be back. I thought I should say it out loud." The silence that followed was not hostile, was a hallway between two very different understandings of the same child. Alina adjusted her daughter slightly. The infant's head now nestled into the crook of her elbow. "She's going home with me," she said. Not as a statement of victory, just a fact. Marcy nodded. "I know." They stood in that stillness, neither one asking for forgiveness, neither one offering explanation. There was no correction that could be made, no erasure of who had held her first, no reversal of what had already imprinted. But there was ownership. Now, quiet, legal, live. Marcy glanced down, then reached into her tote bag. From it, she pulled out something wrapped in tissue, paper worn at the edges, folded with care. She held it out, but didn't step forward. "I brought this the first time before they told me you were conscious." I never gave it to her. "I'm leaving it here." Alina didn't reach for it. Marcy walked to the nearby counter, set the bundle down gently, then stepped back toward the doorway. "I didn't mean to replace you," she said. "I only meant to fill a space they said was empty." Alina finally looked up. The space wasn't empty. Marcy gave a single nod. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't contrite. Just a nod from someone who had stepped back into her own lane, without another word. She turned and left. Alina remained still for a long while. Only the sound of her daughter's breath rose in the quiet. When she eventually walked over to the Atasna, like, look at this. And we all know I've been exploring that. As we see, Alina remained. Still for an agea malaise. I canna convey place with gumline south, where I can lead bade with you, to make bade with Codwell. I get can lead with congree at some may with Ari canida we see to call like us, I can need to come we to can you to kick ada we to can you read you to so you get to sora hide I kick to you if it to we I think I do with at we go we I would go take off to me I like keep rock on the thing counter. She unwrapped the tissue. Inside was a small knitted cap. Pale blue and cream, handmade, soft dot. She didn't discard it. She folded it gently and tucked it into the corner of her daughter's going home bag. Not as a token of gratitude. Not even as a memory. Just as a trace. Because stories like this don't end with triumph or revenge. They end with presence. With the child carried out into the world not by the loudest, not by the first dot, but by the one who stayed.